Hi guys, this is Lauren with Lauren Watkins Art, and welcome to my new series I am calling We Don't Need to Buy New Paints Because We Have Paint at Home. And this is a series where I really want to buy a new tube of paint, but instead of buying it, I try to recreate it using paints I already have, like this wild purple color from Schmincke. I have so many paints, I really don't need to buy more, and I have a lot of single pigment paints. So when I saw this tube of paint from Schmincke and I was tempted to buy it, I stopped and thought, let's look up the pigment information and see if it's possible for me to recreate it. It has pigment PV19, pigment PB29, and pigment PG17. So I rummaged through my collection and it turns out I can make this paint a lot. I even have several tubes of paint that are containing 2 of the 3 pigments. So I'm like 2/3 of the way there just by using those colors. So I really didn't need to buy that tube of paint. I obviously really like PV19 and PB29 combined. So for the sake of this series, I'm going to just stick with the pure pigments and not focus on the combination paints. So first up is PV19, which is a quinacridone color, and it ranges from a slightly pink primary color, primary red, all the way down to like a magenta and red violet. So it definitely leans more cool, but it can range from red to a red violet color. It's a gorgeous pigment and it has a lot of utility. I'm going to test one of the cooler colors and one of the warmer versions of this paint, just so we don't get carried away with samples. Next up is our PB29, and this is our ultramarine blue, and this is what's going to create most of the granulation within this pigment. Ultramarine blue is a very granulating color, especially if you get French ultramarine. French ultramarine tends to lean closer to red on the color wheel. It's a little bit more like closer to violet, and it granulates a lot more. And granulation is pigments that are a little bit bigger. They kind of separate out and it creates this texture on our watercolor paintings. And some artists love granulation, some don't. And some artists love granulation that separates out and you can see multiple colors. Some artists don't. It's up to personal opinion. I love the almost dual chrome effect that happens. So here is comparing my 2 French ultramarine pigments, and you can see that the Schmincke granulates a lot more. And so I'm going to test 2 granulating French ultramarines and one of the regular ultramarine blues. Then we have our 3 greens, our PG17s. This is oxide of chromium or chromium oxide. And this is also a granulating color, and this is just a light touch within this mix. This isn't a main color. It's just used to slightly neutralize the red tones and to help aid in granulation. So because it's not a heavy hitter in this mix, I am only going to use the Sap Green version that I have. But again, you can use what you have. You might have multiples of some of these paints, and you can play around and create a custom mix that fits your sensibilities. So what colors am I going to be swatching? I'm going to be swatching the M. Quinacridone Rose. That's because it was the most similar to the Carmine from Schmincke that I had, but I didn't want to use up all of my half pan just by doing these random swatches. So I just picked the next warmest red that was similar to it. Then I chose Rose from Daniel Smith, which is a lot more of like a pink magenta color. So those are my 2 reds. My 3 blues I'm testing out are both French ultramarines, the one from Daniel Smith, the one from Schmincke, and then I'm testing out the regular ultramarine blue from MaimeriBlu. So those are my 3 ultramarine blues. I wanted to test out different levels of granulation. So the most granulating would be the Schmincke, and then it would go the Daniel Smith, and then the MaimeriBlu one, which was very transparent and had hardly any granulation. So that's going to be the biggest factor in this. And then we are just going to be using the same green without, so we have 1 level of constant. Now, something I noticed when I was looking at the reference photos for this paint, since I don't have a sample of it in front of me, is that how pink or how blue and how dark it was varied drastically within the swatches and the reference photos and marketing photos, some showed a really dark purple, and others it was more of like a red-violet color. So I just chose a red-violet color to do with most of my swatches, and then later on I did a darker mix. Now, there is not a ton of variation within these different mixes I create. It's very subtle. So if you only have one PV19 and one PB29 and one PG17, or even if you don't have the green, you can get something close and something similar. I'm just kind of going out in the weeds because I was nerding out on pigments one day and I just wanted to see what would happen if I just kind of traded up different factors within these mixes and to see what I could create. And what I noticed is that the ultramarine blue was the biggest player in all of this. So if you want to create this kind of red-violet color and you want it to be super granulating, you need to choose a blue that granulates a lot. If you don't really care and you just want the general mass tone where it's just kind of this pinky purple color, just use what you have. And I wouldn't stress too much about it. Another thing I wanted to bring up is that I am not putting down convenience mixes, not by a mile, because I love convenience mixes. If it's a combination that you use a lot, tubes of that paint can really speed up the process and allow you to get a lot of consistency within your paintings. I'm just doing this so if there is a color that you think you might like but you're not sure, I'm showing you how you can recreate it using what you have to see if it's something you might like, and also to show you how pigments can vary drastically. So you might have 4 tubes of paint with the same pigment and it might look very different depending on the brand, how the concentration of pigment within that paint, how the pigment is treated. There is a lot of factors, and so you might want to keep that in mind when you're trying to recreate a color. So here is a close-up of the MaimeriBlu combos, and you can see not much granulation. It's very more uniform in mixes, and they aren't the strongest pigment mixes, and there's variation between each mix because I was doing it by hand and I wasn't weighing out each color, but you can see very smooth, not a lot of granulation. This one is the one using the Schmincke French Ultramarine, and you can see a lot more pigment granulation starting to kind of show through. And one has the warmer red and one of them has the cooler red, and you can see how that affects the end result on this smoother paper. Then for the third one, this is our most granulating, and this is our Schmincke French Ultramarine, and you can see this is getting us closer to that granulation that we're seeing in the pictures that were used for marketing. So that's telling me that they probably use their French ultramarine version of the PB29 pigment. They have a regular ultramarine blue and it's not nearly as granulating. Now, don't stress if you don't have it. It is a very expensive paint. One option you might be able to utilize and use the paints you already have is by purchasing something called granulation medium. I haven't tested it out myself. I just bought it and I'm waiting for it to arrive, and then I will be testing it out. And that is a medium that you mix in with your paints as you're painting, and it helps make more granulation. So if you want to create more texture. And so that might be something really helpful if you're trying to recreate these super granulating colors at home. So here I am swatching these different mixes on 100% cotton paper, and it's a rough press paper. And this rough press paper really allows us to see a lot more texture. I'm also testing out different aspects of the paint by doing some wet into wet washes. I'm doing some that have a little bit more blue in them and some that are a little bit more red. I added salt to one of the samples, and I'm just seeing more of what I can do with this paint after the initial swatches. I told you this is going to be swatching galore because I spent a whole day just swatching colors. And I found it really enjoyable because I just love seeing color and seeing what it can do. And this feels like witchcraft. So you can see there's one with the salt, one that I did bleed in, and then one I did with a lot of water to really force that granulation. and then just did some fine details to see what would happen with the paint on its own. So let's see that final side-by-side comparison. So this is the Schmincke French Ultramarine, and you can see the two different reds, and the one on the left is the M gram, so it's a lot warmer of a red, and the one on the right is a lot cooler of a red. And so this is more just a personal preference. I actually kind of like the warmer red with it because I feel like that warm red in contrast stands out a little bit more, and I really like the really granulating blue. Here is the samples with the Daniel Smith French Ultramarine, and you can see there is more subtle granulation, but it's not as extreme. For our final example, this is what it looks like using our just traditional ultramarine blue. So it still granulates, but not nearly as much, and it gives you a lot more of a uniform effect. So if you don't want a lot of granulations, but you really like the color that these make together, then use a more mild blue in terms of granulation. So here is my winning combo and what I'm going to use when I want to recreate this color. I'm going to use my M gram Quinacridone Rose because I liked the contrast of a slightly warmer red with the blue. I'm going to use my Schmincke and then just the Sap Green. And I felt like that was a really gorgeous combination. If I don't want to use my Schmincke paint because it's a little bit pricey, I will be using my Daniel Smith French Ultramarine, and that gives me a very similar effect. So anyways, I hope that this gave you an idea of how these granulating colors work and how you can create your own and hopefully save a little bit of money using the paints you already have. And I will see you next time. Bye!